Let me ask you something. What if the oldest story ever told, across every continent, every civilization, every ancient text we've ever found, wasn't about a monster? What if the serpent wasn't the villain? What if someone made it the villain on purpose? 19 ancient traditions. We surveyed 19 of them: Sumerian, Egyptian, Hindu, Chinese, Aboriginal Australian, Mesoamerican, African, Greek, Japanese, Buddhist, and more. And do you know how many of them originally portrayed serpent beings as evil? 0. Not one. 78.9% described them as positive, as teachers, creators, healers, protectors of humanity. And the rest? They were complex, sure, ambivalent, but none of them, not a single one, started out calling the serpent evil. That came later. This is the story of how it happened, how the most universal symbol of wisdom on earth was turned into the symbol of evil, how texts were burned, temples were demolished, entire religions were erased, and how a 2,500-year campaign to rewrite history almost succeeded. Almost. All right, before we talk about what was destroyed, we need to understand what existed in the first place. Because you can't appreciate what was lost if you don't know what was there. Let's start at the very beginning. Not Genesis, the real beginning. Sumer. The Sumerians invented writing around 3400 BCE. They are the first civilization to leave us a written record, and their language is what linguists call a language isolate. It has no known relatives, no parent language, no siblings. It just appears. And there are over 500,000 cuneiform tablets sitting in museums around the world right now. Less than 10% have been fully translated. Let that sit for a second. We have 500,000 ancient documents, and we've barely read any of them. Now, in those texts, the ones we have translated, the most important god in the Sumerian pantheon isn't Enlil, the chief of the gods. It's not Anu, the sky father. It's Enki, the god of wisdom, water, and creation. And Enki's symbol? 2 intertwined serpents. Sound familiar? It should. The twin serpent staff became the caduceus of Hermes, which many medical organizations still use as their emblem today, even though the true medical symbol is the single serpent rod of Asclepius. Either way, that serpent and staff connection goes back over 5,000 years. Enki lives in the Abzu, an underground freshwater realm. He creates humanity by mixing clay with the blood of a god described as having intelligence. He gives humanity the M.E., which are these divine decrees, over 100 of them, covering everything from writing to metallurgy to music to law. They're described as transferable objects. You can carry them, steal them, give them away. They function like civilization in a box. Literally, like someone handed early humans the operating system for society. But here's the part that matters most for today. When the Divine Council, led by Enlil, decides to destroy humanity with a great flood, it's Enki, the serpent god, who defies the order. He speaks to a reed wall, while a man named Ziusudra just happens to be standing on the other side. He saves humanity through a loophole, a trick, an act of rebellion against authority. The serpent god saved us. That's what the oldest written records on Earth say. Now, Enki's son, Ningishzida, takes this even further. His name means Lord of the Good Tree. He's depicted as a serpent. He guards the gate of heaven. Lord of the Good Tree, a serpent, guarding access to divine knowledge. Does that remind you of anything? And it's not just Sumer. Let's go around the world, quickly. Egypt, the most extensive serpent deity system in the ancient world. Wadjet, the cobra goddess, was the protector of the pharaoh. Every single pharaoh wore the uraeus, a rearing cobra, on their crown as the mark of divine authority. Mehen, the serpent, coiled around the sun god Ra to protect him on his nightly journey through the underworld. Even Apep, the chaos serpent, wasn't evil in the moral sense. He was primordial chaos, a force of nature, not a deliberate villain. India. The Nagas have been worshipped for 4,000 years. They live in Patala, a 7-level underground realm described in Hindu texts as more beautiful than heaven. The great serpent Shesha supports the entire universe. Vasuki helped churn the cosmic ocean to produce the nectar of immortality. And the Nair community in Kerala, India? They maintain active serpent worship to this day in the 21st century through sacred groves, festivals, and trance dances. China. The dragon is the most revered creature in Chinese civilization. Benevolent, wise, associated with imperial power. The emperor sat on the dragon throne. Wearing the wrong number of dragon claws on your robes was punishable by death. That's how seriously they took dragon lineage. And Nuwa and Fuqi, the founding creators of humanity in Chinese mythology, are depicted with human torsos and intertwined serpent tails. Intertwined serpent tails. Thousands of miles from Sumer. No documented contact. Same image. Mesoamerica. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was the most revered deity across the entire region for over 1,600 years. Creator of humanity, teacher of writing, agriculture, the calendar, and the arts. Archaeologically attested from around 100 BCE. And at Chichen Itza, twice a year at the equinox, sunlight creates a serpent of light descending the pyramid stairs. 365 steps, connecting to the carved serpent head at the base. They built a stone computer that makes a serpent of light appear on schedule, for their most sacred teacher. Australia. The rainbow serpent tradition in Aboriginal Australia may be 60,000 years old. That predates every written text by 55,000 years. Africa. The Fawn people of Dahomey? Killing a python was punishable by death. Their cosmic serpent, Aido Huedo, carried the creator god in its mouth and now supports the world from underground. In voodoo, Dambala's symbol, two intertwined serpents, independently parallels the Sumerian caduceus. No documented cultural contact between West Africa and ancient Mesopotamia. Greece. Cecrops, half man, half serpent, founded Athens. Asclepius, god of healing, whose symbol is a serpent on a staff. We still use it. The medical profession worldwide carries the mark of the serpent to this day. Nobody thinks twice about it. The pattern is overwhelming. In the oldest records from every civilization, Sumerian, Egyptian, Hindu, Chinese, Japanese, Mesoamerican, African, Aboriginal, Greek, Norse, Celtic, Native American, Southeast Asian. The serpent is the teacher, the creator, the healer, the protector. That's the original record. That's what was there before someone decided to change it. Now, let's talk about the Anunnaki specifically, because their story is a perfect case study of how these beings went from honored to demonized, and how modern misinterpretation made things even worse. In the original Sumerian texts, and these are Tier 1 verified, peer-reviewed, sitting in museums, the Anunnaki are the most powerful deities in the pantheon. The name means princely offspring or royal seed. They're the children of An, the sky god, and Ki, the earth goddess. 7 of them form a divine council that decrees the fates of humanity. Anu, Enlil, Enki, Ninhursag, Nana, Utu, Inanna. They debate, they disagree, they vote. It's almost like an ancient parliament. And here's something important to track. Over time, even within Mesopotamian culture, the Anunnaki's role shifted. In the earliest Sumerian period, they're heavenly deities with immense power, revered. After the Akkadian period, they become the ones who decree humanity's fate. Still powerful, but more distant. By the Old Babylonian period, they're distinguished from the Igigi, the lesser gods. And by the late Babylonian period, 300 Anunnaki are placed in heaven, but 600 are placed in the underworld. Sky gods became underworld gods. Sound familiar? It should. It mirrors exactly what happened to serpent beings in other traditions. Now let's add the Apkallu, the 7 sages. These are pre-flood beings documented in the Uruk list, each paired with one of the pre-flood kings. The Babylonian priest Berosus, writing around 280 BCE, describes the first of them, Oannes, as a being with the entire body of a fish, but beneath the fish's head was a human head, and human feet grew alongside the fish's tail, as if a human existed inside a fish. He emerged from the Persian Gulf and taught humanity everything: writing, mathematics, architecture, law, agriculture. And Berosus says, quote, "From that time on, nothing further has been invented." The 7th sage, Utuabzu, he ascended to heaven. The 7th generation in the Bible, Enoch, who walked with God and was no more. The 7th Sumerian pre-flood king, Enmen-dur-Ana, from the city of the sun god. Enoch's lifespan? 365 years, the solar year. That's not a coincidence. That's the same story, told by 2 different cultures, with the serial numbers filed off. But here's where the inversion happens. Scholar Amar Anus published a paper in 2010 in the Journal of Semitic Studies, arguing that the Watchers of First Enoch, the 200 fallen angels who descend to Mount Hermon and teach forbidden arts, are directly derived from the Apkallu tradition. Same structure, same pre-flood timing, same knowledge transfer, same named arts: metalworking, astrology, writing, cosmetics. But the valence flipped. In Mesopotamia, the Apkallu are celebrated. Their divine gifts to humanity. Temples depict them in relief sculptures, holding the pine cone and the bucket, symbols of purification and wisdom. The British Museum has catalogued Apkallu reliefs you can look up right now. In the Jewish tradition that emerged during the Babylonian Exile, when Jewish scholars were literally living in Babylon, surrounded by these traditions, the Apkallu become the Watchers, and the Watchers are condemned. The knowledge they bring is labeled forbidden. Their offspring, the Nephilim, are called abominations, and the flood is sent to destroy everything they created. Same beings, same story, opposite moral judgment. The Book of Enoch takes this further, naming 200 watchers with specific assigned sins. Azazel taught metalworking and cosmetics. In Mesopotamia, that's a gift. In Enoch, it's a crime. Barakiel taught astrology, sacred in Babylon, forbidden in Enoch. And the Book of Enoch was hugely influential. The Epistle of Jude in the New Testament directly quotes it. Chapter 1, verses 14 and 15. The early church treated it as scripture. 11 Aramaic copies were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, confirming its pre-Christian antiquity. Then the church banned it. They quoted it as scripture, and then they excluded it from the Bible. Ethiopia is the only Christian tradition that preserved it in their 81-book canon. For 1,600 years, the rest of the world didn't even know it existed. And then, in the modern era, the misinterpretation got even worse. In 1976, Zecharia Sitchin published The 12th Planet. He claimed the Anunnaki were extraterrestrial beings from a planet called Nibiru, who came to Earth to mine gold. Now, every mainstream Assyriologist who has reviewed Sitchin's translations rejects them. Sitchin translated Anunnaki as those who from heaven to earth came. The actual translation is princely seed. He translated Shem as rocket. It means name or reputation. These aren't matters of opinion. They're verifiable in standard cuneiform dictionaries. And then David Icke came along in 1999 and added the reptilian layer. He took Sitchin's already flawed framework and merged it with theosophical serpent race concepts from Helena Blavatsky, shape-shifting reptilian infiltrators from a 1929 King Kull story by Robert E. Howard, the creator of Conan the Barbarian, and underground evil reptoids from a 1943 science fiction magazine. That's the lineage. Fiction to fringe to mainstream conspiracy. 1888, Blavatsky. 1929, Howard invents shape-shifting reptilian infiltrators in a King Kull adventure story. 1943, Shaver publishes about underground evil reptoids in Amazing Stories, a sci-fi magazine. 1976, Sitchin mistranslates the cuneiform. 99, Ike combines all of it. No ancient text describes shape-shifting reptilians infiltrating human governments. That specific idea comes from pulp fiction, and it buried the real story under a mountain of nonsense. Because here's the tragedy. The real story, the one in the actual texts, the Tier 1 verified evidence, is extraordinary enough on its own. You don't need to make things up. The oldest civilization on Earth described serpent-associated beings who created humanity, taught them everything, and saved them from a flood. That's already incredible. Now, there's another piece to this that we need to cover, because it connects directly to both the ancient traditions and the suppression timeline. And that's the underground. Virtually every ancient civilization describes beings living beneath the surface of the earth. And these descriptions are strikingly consistent, even between cultures that had no known contact with each other. Let's start with the physical evidence, the stuff you can actually visit. Cappadocia, Turkey. Over 200 underground cities have been discovered in this single region. 200. The most famous is Derinkuyu, 18 stories deep, 85 meters underground, capable of sheltering 20,000 people with their livestock and food stores. It has ventilation shafts reaching the surface, water wells, oil presses, wineries, schools, and chapels. The doors are massive circular stones, up to 500 pounds, that can only be opened from the inside. And that's just one of 200. In 2013, construction workers in the town of Nevşehir accidentally broke through into what may be the largest underground city ever found. Larger than Derinkuyu. It's still being excavated. Now, the mainstream explanation is reasonable. This region has soft volcanic tuff that's easy to carve, and the cities were built incrementally over centuries for refuge during invasions. Hittites, Phrygians, and Byzantine Christians all used them. Fair enough. But 200 cities? That exceeds what you need for occasional refuge. Some archaeologists have noted the scale is disproportionate to the documented threat. Then there are the Longyu grottos in China. 24 hand-carved caverns discovered in 1992 in Zhejiang province. An estimated 1 million cubic meters of rock removed. And there is no historical record of their construction. None. Not a single mention in any Chinese historical text. Whoever carved out 1 million cubic meters of rock, enough to fill 400 Olympic swimming pools, didn't leave a note. The hypogeum of Halsaflieni in Malta, dating to around 4000 BCE. 3 levels deep, containing the remains of approximately 7,000 individuals, and designed with acoustic chambers that resonate at 111 Hertz, a frequency that modern research suggests can alter states of consciousness. Now let's connect this to the traditions. The Hopi people of the American Southwest have an oral tradition. And I want to be careful here, because indigenous oral traditions deserve respect and precision. About beings they call the Ant People, or Anunnaki. According to this tradition, the Ant People saved the Hopi during two world-destroying catastrophes. During the first world destruction by fire and the second world destruction by ice, the Ant People led the Hopi into underground shelters, fed them, and taught them how to grow food underground. The Ant People are described as thin-bodied, large-headed, with thin limbs, benevolent protectors who sacrificed their own comfort to save human beings. Now, in alternative literature, there's a linguistic connection often made between the Hopi word Anu, meaning ant, and Sinam, meaning people, and the Sumerian Anunnaki. I want to be transparent about this. That connection is not established in mainstream Hopi linguistics. It's speculative, Tier 3. But the tradition itself, the Ant People saving humanity by taking them underground during catastrophe, that's documented and genuine within Hopi oral history. And the Hopi aren't alone. Emergence myths, stories about humanity coming up from underground, are widespread among Puebloan peoples. The Zuni, the Tewa, the Acoma, all have variations. The pattern is an underground world, beings who help humanity survive, and an emergence into the current world. In Hindu tradition, the Nagas live in Patala, a 7-level underground realm. And here's what always strikes me. The Vishnu Purana describes Patala as more beautiful than heaven. Jeweled cities, gardens, pleasures. This is not an underworld in the Western sense. It's a paradise, ruled by serpent beings who are guardians of wisdom. 7 underground levels. That number keeps coming up. 7 levels of Patala in Hinduism. 7-level underworld in Sumerian tradition. 7 heavens and 7 earths in Islamic cosmology. 7 levels of Xibalba in Maya tradition. The Kabbalistic tree of life maps to 7 levels. And then there's the question of biological feasibility. Permanent underground civilization is genuinely problematic for humans. You need vitamin D from sunlight. You need ventilation. You need sanitation. Circadian rhythm disruption causes depression and cognitive decline. Any submarine crew can tell you that. But, and this is an observation the researchers noted, reptiles have different biological needs. Cold-blooded metabolism, less UV dependence, comfortable in consistent underground temperatures, better adapted to low-light environments. If, and I'm flagging this clearly as speculative, Tier 3, If a non-human species with reptilian biology existed, underground habitation would be significantly easier for them than for us. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm saying the biological argument is worth noting. What is Tier 1 is this. Over 200 underground cities exist in Cappadocia alone. Ancient traditions across every continent describe underground beings who are overwhelmingly positive. Teachers, protectors, saviors. And the physical scale of some of these underground constructions defies easy explanation. All right, this is the core of it. This is where we trace exactly how and when the serpent went from the most respected symbol in human civilization to the embodiment of evil. And we're going to do this chronologically, with dates, names, and verified events. Because this wasn't an accident, and it wasn't overnight. It was a 2,500-year process with documented steps. Step 1. Zoroastrianism. Around 1500 to 600 BCE, scholars debate the exact dating of Zarathustra, Zoroastrianism introduces something genuinely new to human religion. Absolute moral dualism. Good versus evil. Ahura Mazda versus Angra Mainyu. Light versus darkness. And Azidahaka, a serpent figure, is placed firmly on the side of evil. Before Zoroastrianism, no major tradition cast the serpent as morally evil. Not the Sumerians, not the Egyptians, not the Hindus, not the Chinese. The serpent could be dangerous, sure, powerful, chaotic, but not evil in a moral sense. Zoroastrianism changed that. And it matters because of what happened next. Step 2. The Babylonian Exile, around 586 BCE. When the Babylonians conquered Jerusalem and deported the Jewish elite to Babylon, something extraordinary happened. Jewish scholars found themselves living in the heartland of Mesopotamian culture. Surrounded by the Apkallu traditions, the Enki stories, the creation narratives that predated their own by over 1,000 years. And they were also exposed to Zoroastrian dualism, since Persia conquered Babylon in 539 BCE and freed the Jews. It's during and after this period that the Hebrew Bible takes its final form, and the rewrite is visible. The Sumerian Enki, serpent god who creates humanity, gives knowledge, and saves people from the flood, becomes the Genesis serpent. Same act, giving knowledge, different verdict. In Sumer, it's a gift. In Genesis, it's the original sin. But here's the thing they couldn't quite erase. Genesis 3:22. God himself says, quote, "The man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil." The serpent told the truth. It's right there in the text. And Nakash, the Hebrew word translated as serpent, has 3 meanings in the Brown Driver Briggs Hebrew lexicon: serpent, diviner, and shining one, or luminous being. The serpent in Eden could just as accurately be translated as the Shining One. Step 3. The Second Temple Period, roughly 516 BCE to 70 CE. This is when the Satan concept develops. In the original Hebrew, Ha-Satan means the adversary, and it's a job title, not a name. In the book of Job, the Satan is a member of God's court who questions Job's sincerity. He's an employee, not an enemy. But over the centuries of the Second Temple period, influenced by Zoroastrian dualism, the adversary becomes a personal evil being. And the serpent gets retroactively linked to this new Satan concept. But that link is not in Genesis. It's not in the original texts. The explicit equation of serpent equals Satan doesn't appear until Revelation 12:9, written in the late 1st century CE. That's over 1,000 years after Genesis was composed. Step 4. The Early Church. Around 180 CE, a church father named Irenaeus writes against heresies, and among the groups he attacks are the Nazarenes. Their name comes from the Hebrew word nachash, serpent, and the Ophites, from the Greek ophis, also serpent. These were real groups, real Christians, who worshipped the serpent as the liberator of humanity. They had theological arguments for this. Their texts, many of which we now have thanks to Nag Hammadi, present the creator of the material world, the demiurge, as ignorant and tyrannical. He declares, "I am God, and there is no other," echoing Isaiah 45:5. And the serpent is sent by Sophia, divine wisdom, to wake humanity up. The serpent is the instructor, a messenger from the true God of light. The testimony of truth, one of the Nag Hammadi texts, asks, "What sort of God forbids knowledge?" That question was buried for 1,600 years. Step 5. The Church Councils, 4th century CE. In 325, Emperor Constantine convened 318 bishops at Nicaea to unify Christian doctrine, producing the Nicene Creed and settling the Arian controversy. That set the direction. But the biblical canon itself was finalized over the following decades. Athanasius's Easter letter of 367 CE produced the first list matching the modern New Testament. Then the Council of Hippo in 393 and the Council of Carthage in 397 made it official. And the books that portrayed the serpent positively? Excluded. The Apocryphon of John, which appears 3 times in the Nag Hammadi collection, proving how central it was, excluded. The Gospel of Thomas, which emphasizes personal knowledge over institutional authority, excluded. The Book of Enoch, which describes the Watchers in such detail that the Church apparently found it threatening, excluded. The Bible was assembled through a political process spanning decades. Constantine wanted religious unity for political stability. Books were selected to support institutional authority. Books that empowered individuals to seek knowledge directly, without priests, without churches, without submission to hierarchy, were systematically removed. Step 6. The Edict of Thessalonica, 380 CE. Christianity becomes the only legal religion in the Roman Empire. Pagan worship becomes a capital offense. And then the Theodosian decrees of 391 and 392 order pagan temples closed. Think about what was shut down. The Oracle of Delphi, named for the python, the great serpent. The original deity of that site was a serpent. Apollo killed it and took over. That transition, serpent god replaced by sky god, may itself record an older cultural shift. And now the temple of Asclepius, the serpent healer, the foundation of Western medicine, closed. The temple of Isis at Philae, the last functioning Egyptian temple, shut down in 537 CE by Emperor Justinian. And with it died hieroglyphic literacy. For 1,500 years, until the Rosetta Stone in 1799. Hypatia of Alexandria, mathematician, astronomer, philosopher, the last great scholar of the ancient world, was dragged from her chariot by a Christian mob in 415 CE, stripped and murdered with tiles and shells for the crime of preserving knowledge. And within the Bible itself, the suppression is recorded. 2 Kings, chapter 18, verse 4. King Hezekiah, around 715 BCE, broke into pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made, for until those days the people of Israel had been making offerings to it. This was the Nehushtan, a sacred object made by Moses himself, Numbers 21:8, a divinely sanctioned healing symbol, destroyed by a later reformer who wanted centralized Yahweh-only worship. Serpent worship was indigenous to Israel. It wasn't foreign. It wasn't imported. A serpent object made by their greatest prophet was worshipped for centuries before they destroyed it. Step 7. The Albigensian Crusade, 1209 to 1229. The Cathars of southern France held Gnostic beliefs. They believed the material world was created by a lesser deity, the same theology as the Nag Hammadi texts. They believed in direct spiritual experience over church authority. The Catholic Church launched a 20-year military campaign to exterminate them. At Béziers, the papal legate reportedly said, "Kill them all. God will recognize his own." Cathar texts were almost entirely destroyed. An entire Christian tradition, one compatible with the positive serpent theology, was erased by military force. Step 8. The New World. The Maya had thousands of codices. Thousands. Bishop Diego de Landa organized a book burning at Mani on July 12, 1562. He burned 27 codices, hundreds of cult images, and 5,000 idols. His own words, quote, "We found a large number of books, and as they contained nothing in which were not to be seen superstition and lies of the devil, we burned them all." Today, 4 Maya codices survive. 4 out of thousands. And De Landa specifically targeted feathered serpent traditions. Quetzalcoatl, the being who taught civilization, who was revered across Mesoamerica for over 1,600 years, was deliberately recast as demonic. De Landa later deeply regretted his actions and spent years trying to reconstruct what he'd destroyed. He wrote the Relación de las Cosas de Yucatán, ironically, now our best source on Maya culture. But the damage was done. The Spanish didn't just burn books. They demolished temples to Quetzalcoatl and built churches directly on top of them. The same pattern we saw in Rome. New religion built physically on the ruins of the old. And it continued. The British Empire dismissed Sanskrit Naga traditions as superstition. African sacred objects were looted. The Benin bronzes, taken in 1897, included serpentine imagery. The British Museum holds approximately 130,000 cuneiform tablets today. Most are still unread. The Chinese Cultural Revolution between 1966 and 1976 destroyed enormous quantities of ancient texts, art, and artifacts. Dragon and serpent traditions in China survived primarily through oral tradition. And in 2003, during the Iraq invasion, the Iraq Museum was looted. Thousands of artifacts from the cradle of Mesopotamian civilization, the very civilization that gave us the original serpent stories, stolen or destroyed. Now, I want to be fair here. The skeptical counterargument is that knowledge destruction follows predictable patterns of conquest and political upheaval. The serpent stuff was destroyed along with everything else. And that's partly true. But the specific targeting is also documented. De Landa explicitly targeted feathered serpent traditions. Theodosius specifically closed serpent-associated temples. Delphi, Asclepius. Hezekiah specifically destroyed the Nehushtan. Nicaea specifically excluded Gnostic texts with positive serpent theology. While not every act of destruction specifically targeted serpent knowledge, a disproportionate number did. Let me tell you about two discoveries that changed everything, and how long they were kept from public view. December 1945. A farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Saman is digging for fertilizer near the town of Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt. He finds a sealed clay jar. Inside, 13 leather-bound codices containing 52 ancient texts. Written in Coptic, dating to the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, though the originals were likely composed in the 1st and 2nd centuries. These are the Nag Hammadi texts, and they'd been buried, almost certainly deliberately, to protect them from destruction. The most likely trigger was Athanasius's Easter letter of 367 CE, which listed the approved books of the Bible and ordered everything else destroyed. Monks at a nearby monastery probably buried them rather than burned them. These texts sat underground for approximately 1,600 years, and when they were found, it took 32 years until 1977 for a full English translation to be published. 32 years. The discovery of a lifetime, hidden from the public for a generation. What's in them is profound. The Apocryphon of John, appearing 3 times because of its importance, describes the creation of the material world by the demiurge Yaldabaoth, a being described as ignorant and arrogant. He creates the physical world as a prison, and the serpent is sent by the true divine power to wake humanity up. In these texts, the fall is not a catastrophe, it's an awakening. Then the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered between 1947 and 1956 in 11 caves near Qumran. Over 900 manuscripts spanning from 250 BCE to 68 CE, including 11 copies of First Enoch, the Book of Giants, the War Scroll, and the Birth of Noah. The Birth of Noah, designated 4Q534, describes Noah being born with luminous white skin, red hair, and eyes that illuminate the entire house like the sun. His own father, Lamech, suspected his wife had conceived with a watcher. She had to specifically deny it. The text treats watcher-human contact as a known, plausible occurrence. And here's one of my personal favorite details. The Book of Giants, found at Qumran, names Gilgamesh, the greatest hero of Sumerian literature, king of Uruk, as one of the Nephilim, the giant offspring of the Watchers. The Jewish scribes at Qumran looked at the Mesopotamian tradition and said, "Yes, that's the same story. Those are the same beings." Now, how long were the Dead Sea Scrolls restricted? Access was controlled by a small team for decades. Full public access wasn't achieved until the 1990s, roughly 50 years after discovery. The Huntington Library broke the monopoly in 1991 by releasing unauthorized photographs. 50 years. Why? And then there's the Vatican. The Archivum Apostolicum Vaticanum. 52 miles of shelving, documents spanning over 1,000 years. Access is restricted to qualified scholars who must apply, and many sections remain permanently closed. What's in there that relates to pre-Christian traditions? We don't know. I want to note that the claim that the Vatican holds specific texts about serpent beings or non-human entities is speculative, Tier 3. But the restriction of access? That's Tier 1. That's a fact. The Inquisition maintained the Index of Forbidden Books, the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, from 1559 to 1966. 407 years of telling people what they were not allowed to read. Galileo was on that list. Copernicus was on that list. Descartes, Pascal, Victor Hugo. Any book that challenged church authority or presented alternative cosmology, banned. And Giordano Bruno, the Dominican friar who advocated for an infinite universe with countless worlds, for Hermetic cosmology that drew on these same serpent wisdom traditions, was burned alive at the stake on February 17, 1600. They burned him for asking questions about the cosmos. Even Isaac Newton, possibly the greatest scientific mind in history, spent more time on alchemy and hermetic studies than on physics. He wrote over 1,000,000 words on alchemy. John Maynard Keynes called him the last of the magicians, the last of the Babylonians and Sumerians. Newton personally translated the Emerald Tablet, a hermetic text associated with Thoth, the Egyptian equivalent of Enki. And Newton believed he was recovering ancient knowledge, not discovering new truth. He had to keep this work secret because of the association with heresy. The Book of Thoth in Egyptian tradition was said to be guarded by serpents at the bottom of the Nile. The Eden parallel, serpent guarding forbidden knowledge, is unmistakable. And whoever wrote the Genesis version flipped the moral. In Egypt, you seek the knowledge. In Genesis, you're punished for it. I've spent a lot of time showing you what was destroyed. Let me show you what survived, specifically where it survived and why. Because the existence of living serpent traditions proves the demonization thesis better than any ancient text can. Southeast Asia, where Buddhism and Hinduism became the dominant religions, serpent traditions were integrated, not destroyed, and they thrive today. In Cambodia, the Khmer Empire's foundation legend says the Brahmin Kaundinya married a Naga princess named Soma. The most powerful empire in Southeast Asian history claimed literal serpent ancestry. And in 1297, a Chinese diplomat named Zhou Daguan recorded, as an eyewitness, that the Khmer king at Angkor went nightly to a golden tower where he consorted with a 9-headed serpent spirit in female form. If the king missed a single night, disaster was expected. That's not ancient mythology. That's an eyewitness account from a foreign diplomat with no motive to fabricate serpent stories. In Vietnam, the national origin story is Lac Long Quan, the Dragon Lord, married O Ke, and she produced 100 eggs. The Vietnamese call themselves children of the dragon, grandchildren of the immortal. An entire nation of 100 million people officially claims dragon ancestry. It's celebrated with a national holiday. It's UNESCO heritage. In Bali, millions of Hindus pass through Naga mouth doorways every day. At Angkor Wat, walking through the city gates means walking along a Naga's body. The balustrades are giant serpents held by rows of gods and demons. In Thailand, the Naga fireballs, luminous orbs that rise from the Mekong River, are observed annually by tens of thousands of people. No fully satisfactory scientific explanation has been offered for the phenomenon. Now, here's the control case. The Philippines. Same region, same indigenous traditions before colonization. But instead of Buddhism and Hinduism, the Philippines got 300 years of Spanish Catholicism. Result? Near total suppression of serpent traditions. The Bakunawa, the Philippine dragon, nearly erased. Meanwhile, next door in Thailand, Naga worship is thriving, government-supported, part of daily life. Same indigenous traditions, same region, different colonial religion, opposite outcomes. The one that got monotheism lost its serpent traditions. The one that kept polytheistic and animist traditions kept them alive. That's the thesis, proven in a living laboratory. So where does this leave us? We've traced a clear line from the original positive portrayal, through Zoroastrian dualism, through the Babylonian exile, through the church councils, through the Inquisition, through colonial destruction, all the way to the present. But there's one more layer of damage, and it happened in the 20th century. The fiction to conspiracy pipeline. In 1888, Helena Blavatsky published The Secret Doctrine and introduced the concept of a serpent race to Western occultism. But it was wrapped in theosophical racial hierarchy, deeply problematic stuff. In 1929, Robert E. Howard, the creator of Conan the Barbarian, published a story called The Shadow Kingdom. In it, shape-shifting serpent men infiltrate human society by impersonating leaders. It's a great adventure story. It's also fiction. In 1943, a man named Richard Shaver published stories about evil underground reptoid beings called Deros in Amazing Stories magazine. Again, a science fiction magazine. In 1976, Sitchin mistranslated the Sumerian texts, and in 1999, David Icke combined all of this. Blavatsky's serpent race, Howard's shapeshifters, Shaver's underground reptoids, Sitchin's alien Anunnaki, into a totalizing system of shape-shifting reptilian world leaders who control humanity. And in doing so, he buried 2,500 years of legitimate ancient tradition under a mountain of pulp fiction and paranoia. The real damage of Icke's framework isn't that it's wrong, although it is, and all 5 of our independent research sources unanimously reject the literal shape-shifting reptilian claim. The real damage is what it does to the genuine evidence. When you call a corrupt banker a reptilian, you turn legitimate criticism of the financial system into a conspiracy theory. You make the criticism itself dismissible. The metaphor protects the powerful by making their critics sound crazy. And there's a deeper problem: the secret bloodlines controlling everything narrative, the hidden rulers among us, maps directly onto historical anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. The protocols of the Elders of Zion, medieval blood libel. Icke specifically names families like the Rothschilds. This isn't incidental. 5 out of 5 of our research sources flagged the structural correspondence between reptilian conspiracy theory and historical anti-Semitism. That matters. But here's the irony that kills me. The modern reptilian conspiracy replicates the exact control mechanism that the Gnostic texts warn about. The Gnostic texts say the archons control humanity through fear, ignorance, and hopelessness. And what does the conspiracy theory generate? Fear, hopelessness, a sense that nothing can be done because invisible, all-powerful beings control everything. The thing the Gnostics warned us about is the conspiracy theory about the Gnostics. And there's a self-reinforcing loop here. Serious researchers avoid serpent-being topics because of the conspiracy association. So the only people talking about it are conspiracy theorists. which deepens the association, which drives more serious researchers away. The ancient texts, the real evidence, the Tier 1 verified material, sits orphaned between mainstream academia that won't touch it and alternative communities that misrepresent it. Let me make something clear. The ancient texts describe serpent beings as teachers and knowledge givers. That's verified. The modern conspiracy adds shape-shifting, blood-drinking, and government infiltration. That's unverified and traceable to 20th century fiction. These are different claims. The existence of the second does not invalidate the first. Let me lay it all out, start to finish. The complete demonization timeline, so you can see the full picture. Before 3000 BCE, serpent worship is widespread globally. Every civilization that will leave us records venerates serpent beings as creators, teachers, and healers. The Ubaid figurines from Mesopotamia, dating to around 5500 BCE, show reptilian humanoid figures in domestic contexts, nursing babies in homes. These are not monsters. These are family. Around 1500 to 600 BCE, Zoroastrianism introduces moral dualism. Azzi-Dahaka becomes the first morally evil serpent in any major religious tradition. 715 BCE, King Hezekiah destroys the Nehushtan, the bronze serpent Moses made. Serpent worship suppressed within Israel itself. 586 BCE, the Babylonian Exile. Jewish scholars encounter Mesopotamian and Zoroastrian traditions. The Genesis narrative takes its final form. Enki, the savior, becomes the serpent, the tempter. 516 BCE onward. Second Temple period. The Satan concept develops. The serpent is gradually equated with cosmic evil. 180 CE. Irenaeus writes against heresies, attacking the serpent-worshipping Nazarenes and Ophites. 325 CE. Council of Nicaea. The Nicene Creed standardizes Christian doctrine. Over the following decades, Gnostic texts are excluded from the biblical canon, finalized at Hippo in 393 and Carthage in 397. The serpent as hero narrative officially removed from Christianity. 367 CE. Athanasius's Easter letter lists approved books. The Nag Hammadi texts are buried for protection. They won't resurface for 1600 years. 380 CE. Edict of Thessalonica. Christianity becomes the only legal religion. Serpent-associated temples closed. 391 CE. Serapeum of Alexandria destroyed. 415 CE. Hypatia murdered. 537 CE. Temple of Isis at Philae closed. Hieroglyphic literacy dies. 1209. Albigensian Crusade begins. Cathar Gnostics exterminated. 1562. Delanda burns Maya codices. Feathered serpent traditions specifically targeted. 1600. Giordano Bruno burned at the stake. 1888. Blavatsky introduces serpent race to Western occultism. 1929. Howard writes the first shape-shifting reptilian infiltrator fiction in a King Kull story. 1943. Shaver publishes underground reptoid fiction. 1976. Sitchin mistranslates the Sumerian texts. 1999. Icke combines 50 years of fiction and fringe theory into Reptilian World Leaders. 2,500 years, from Zoroaster to David Icke. That's how long it took to turn the most universal symbol of wisdom on Earth into a conspiracy punchline. Here's what we know. Every ancient civilization described serpent beings. Every single one. Hindu Nagas, Chinese dragons, Mesoamerican feathered serpents, Egyptian cobras, Aboriginal rainbow serpents, Sumerian Enki, African Aido-Huedo, Greek Cecrops. The Hopi ant people took humanity underground to save them. The Apkallu emerged from the sea to teach everything. In the original record, these beings are teachers, creators, protectors, healers. They gave us writing, agriculture, medicine, law, mathematics, and architecture. They defied divine orders to save humanity from floods. They were revered for millennia across every continent. And then, through documented historical processes that we can trace with dates and names and specific events, that record was systematically altered, suppressed, and in many cases, physically destroyed. The Gnostic texts that called the serpent a hero were burned or buried. The Mesoamerican traditions that worshipped the feathered serpent were targeted for destruction. The serpent-venerating Cathars were exterminated. The temples of the serpent healers were demolished. And the books that preserved these traditions were excluded from canon, placed on forbidden lists, or locked in restricted archives. Where the suppression didn't reach, Southeast Asia, parts of India, Aboriginal Australia, West Africa, the traditions survive and thrive to this day. Millions of people still worship serpent beings as benevolent protectors. The demonization is a regional phenomenon, not a universal human conclusion. We didn't lose these traditions by accident. And the modern conspiracy theories that contaminate this topic don't invalidate the ancient evidence. They obscure it. 500,000 cuneiform tablets, less than 10% translated. 52 miles of Vatican archives. Dead Sea Scrolls restricted for 50 years. Nag Hammadi delayed for 32. There's more to learn. And maybe there's a reason someone didn't want us learning it. But the texts survived. The traditions endured. The evidence is there for anyone willing to look at it honestly. without the lens of medieval demonology or modern conspiracy theory. The serpent was the teacher. The record is clear. The suppression is documented. What you do with that information is entirely up to you.